that.
Yeah, you know, we use a term all the time, balance. I don't like that term.
Okay.
Life isn't about achieving balance. It's about integration.
Welcome to the Spartan Endurance Series on the Spartan Up podcast. What do retired General Stanley McChrystal and Chaplain Major General Thomas Solhjem have in common? Number one, they're both on this classic episode of Spartan Up. Number two, our own Colonel Nye got them both on the show. And number three, they both have lived a life examining high performance and asking what happens when you set the highest expectations for yourself and those around you. Our original hosts, Joe DeSena, Johnny Waite, Colonel Nye, and Sefer the Seed Huntress, will introduce the first interview with Stanley McChrystal. This episode of Spartan Up is brought to you by Durolane, a single injection that may provide up to 6 months relief from osteoarthritis knee pain. Risks can include general knee pain and pain at the injection site. You can see full prescribing information at durolane.com.
Hey, Joe, good to see you.
How you doing, Colonel Nye?
I'm doing all right.
You're telling me you're going to introduce me to General McChrystal, M4, they called him?
Yeah, they call him M4.
He's an amazing guy. I got to admit, when my phone rang and I answered and he said, "Hey, it's M4," I was a little scared. I didn't know if there was like a drone over my head or what was going on. But awesome that we got to meet him, and I think the viewers are going to love hearing his perspective on how to become successful, how to get ahead, and how to just get it done. Because there's a guy, as you said, that did.
Oh, yeah. I mean, when he starts talking, you start listening.
We are here at Spartan Up, the podcast, with Stan McChrystal, formerly General McChrystal, from JSOC?
JSOC and ISAF.
And ISAF. And if anybody knows success and grit and perseverance and motivation, it would be you. At the core of this, 4 million Spartans want to know, how did they get motivated? How did they become successful in life? And I know that's a broad question, but if you could dive in, is it something that's born? Is it something that's made? Can it be forged? What do you think?
I don't think it's born. I think everybody's born with different capabilities and potential, but I think most of it comes from experience. It's taught, either self-taught or through experiences. In my military career, what I found was there would be very elite units, and then there would be units that had much lower standards. And the first guess was that the people in the elite units were elite people. They were stronger, faster, smarter, and that the others were just lesser talented. And that was not true at all. In fact, what I found was you could take someone from a lesser unit, put them in an elite unit, and their standards would rise dramatically. Similarly, you could take someone from an elite unit, and if they hadn't served there too long and it hadn't completely sunk in, they could go to a lesser unit. In many cases, they performed at a lower standard. So I think it's about expectations. You set expectations in an organization where everybody dresses a certain way, stands up straight, lives by a certain set of values and behaviors, and people tend to meet those. The higher the expectations, typically the better the organization. People begin to set expectations for themselves. When it becomes truly irreversible, that individual starts to think of themselves in a way that says, I don't do these things that I shouldn't do, and I do these things that I should do, and that starts to form the basis for real self-discipline. You start to set a set of standards for yourself, and the person you don't want to let down is the person in the mirror.
If you're honest with yourself.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So you're saying you think that comes from environment, the people you're around?
I absolutely think it does. I think you create that environment and self-support each other.
So it's not only the parents that are pushing down; it's the peers that set the level of playing.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about it, you went to school and suddenly you saw your parents less than you saw your peers, and suddenly you have teachers and other things, but the peers are the people that you really start to benchmark to. And if the peers have a very low level or a corrupted sense of what they are, you tend to drift that way. I mean, look in neighborhoods where there's trouble, it just tends to happen.
It's funny, so the parents were right, my parents were right, everybody, that you can't hang out with those friends. You're right, you gotta pick your right friends.
I mean, you absolutely do start to pick up the people around you. I mean, it's seen time and time again.
So what would you suggest for the person that maybe isn't in the right environment, right? Maybe they're growing up in a tougher neighborhood with not, or maybe a tough neighborhood's a good neighborhood to grow up in.
Yeah.
Right? How does a person look in the mirror and set their own? I recently interviewed somebody and they said he was a 9-time Tour de France participant. And he said to me, you want to start with your legacy. What do you want your legacy to be? And then work backwards from there. And I thought that was an interesting statement, but a 12-year-old doesn't understand that.
Well, when you tend to judge people by IQ, intelligence, that's one thing. And then we talk about EQ, emotional quotient. And we say that the ability to look long term is the best judge of emotional quotient. Can you defer what you'd like to do now for a higher payoff later? And unfortunately, when we have tough neighborhoods and we have just enough people there that either have high EQ or they have some set of circumstances where they set their standards high and they leave the neighborhood and they do very well, and we say, well, everybody could do it if they just cared enough, if they were just disciplined enough. And I think that's unfair to everybody else, because judging by some anecdotal experiences is not the whole. I think you've got to change that environment so that everyone has the opportunity to see. If you live in an environment where you think you can't really have a chance of becoming something more, if you think the opportunities are more talk than reality because you see everyone around you, maybe see your parents and whatnot, can't do it, then it's very hard. So how do we get to young people particularly and show them there is something that's attainable by you? One of the great things about the Second World War, we came out of the Depression, times were tough. 16 million Americans served, and a tremendous number went somewhere else and had a completely different experience. Suddenly they saw, I could be more than I thought I was. And so we had this incredible boom after the Second World War, the greatest generation, because their expectations had been raised. The GI Bill helped those, and other things helped. But it's how do you get people to raise expectations and support that with enough handholds that they can actually do it?
It's funny, I had breakfast with an Olympic level wrestler this morning, and surprising to me, he said wrestling does better out in Long Island where he is than in New York City. And I said, why? And he said, because it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. There's already a few great wrestlers out there. Everybody wants to be, right? Expectations rose. And so I think you're right. And I think it happens in Africa too with the runners.
Exactly.
Right? So
I don't think it's genetic. I mean, there's some advantages, but in reality, if you see people around you, if your brother, father, or someone you know is very successful in something, you suddenly say, I can do that.
And I want to be that person.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you were in charge of some of the most elite men and women in the world. Some people say it's one thing to achieve success, another thing to maintain success. How did you keep them at that level?
Well, many people, of course, keep themselves at that level. But if you think organizationally, organizations can get very self-satisfied and they can become very complacent, particularly if they've attained a certain level of success, either profitability or standards or battlefield success, and they start to think that if I stick with that same formula, I'm going to be okay. And people get very, very comfortable. And so I think it's important for people to first understand that what got you there is not going to get you further, because the situation's changing. And so the organization has got to decide every day that we are going to literally have to set a new standard for ourselves. It may be a different standard in some cases, a different way of operating. In other cases, it may just be higher standards. That creates something that they call creative tension. And it's a stress, because if you work really hard at a high jump and you finally get over the number, and then someone raises the bar, just comes and raises the bar, you're going to, wait a minute. I spent the last 3 years to make that. Let me celebrate that. And you say, great, celebrate it for 5 minutes. Now we're going to raise the bar. You got to do that in organizations, but you have to understand that it's a balance, because if they get over the bar and then you raise the bar and go, look, you're not making it, you can create almost despair, frustration. Sure. So it's that constant sense of, I'm going to make it harder, I'm going to make it better, but it's attainable. If the high bar gets raised 8 inches, you know you can't make it, and you just say, the heck with it, I retire as a high. Got
it. So it's got to be incremental. And somebody said to me once, push, like you just said, but then retreat, reflect, and then push a little further, retreat, kind of like going in the gym, I guess. And
exactly.
Right.
And you're always, as you know, as an athlete, you're going to have bad races, bad workouts. You're going to get little injuries, and you're suddenly going to think, oh, wait a minute, I did better last year at this than I do now. And you got to set a standard that's realistic, but not to settle. You know, it's too easy to say.
Don't get comfortable.
That's right.
Be uncomfortable, but not so uncomfortable that it's not attainable.
That's right. Exactly.
People performed better when the expectations were higher. After the break, we'll be back for Colonel Nye's conversation with the chaplain, who was then a brigadier general and is now a major general, Thomas Solhjem. What are the rules he's created for himself? We'll hear after the break. We'll be right back to this interview, but first a message from today's sponsor, Durlane. You know that knee pain can really slow you down. Sometimes that knee pain is due to osteoarthritis, a disease that affects some 14 million Americans. Learn about osteoarthritis knee pain and how to alleviate it at oakneepainrelief.com. You'll find information there about non-surgical, non-opioid treatments for osteoarthritis knee pain that may help delay the need for knee surgery. One treatment you'll find there is Durolane, a single injection that may provide up to 6 months of relief from osteoarthritis knee pain. It's indicated for the treatment of mild to moderate osteoarthritis knee pain when conservative treatments have not worked. Risks can include general knee pain and pain at the injection site. Full prescribing information is at Durolane.com. Spartans say no to limits. You can learn more at oakneepainrelief.com. That's oakneepainrelief.com. All right, back to the interview. Spartan Up's own Colonel Nye sat down with then Brigadier General Thomas Solhjem, a chaplain. Solhjem shares stories from his career and the lessons that he's learned and the rules he's created for himself to live by.
This one is really fascinating. It wouldn't be, if I looked at the list and said, these are going to be the great ones, it wouldn't have jumped out at me. And it's incredible. This is a guy who, chaplain in the military for how long, Tim?
A good 35 years or so.
Huge career.
Longer.
But the lessons that he imparts and the stories that he tells and the grace with which he does it is really quite something. So I'm just going to leave it at that. You can go see for yourself.
Yeah, welcome, Spartans. I'm here at the Pentagon, and today it's really special for me because we're going to interview a good friend of mine, Chaplain Tom Solhjem, actually Brigadier General Tom Solhjem, chaplain, who is the Deputy Chief of Chaplains for the entire United States Army. When most people, outside of people in the Army, they might not understand, they don't understand that one, a chaplain maybe is even in the Army.
Right.
And two, you're sitting there with a Ranger combat patch on. You've served in special operations units most of your career, correct? I mean,
Yes.
You've been deployed, I don't know how many times. I don't know if you know how many times, but you've been everywhere that there's bullets flying. And that goes all the way back to, when did you first join the Army?
Well, I first joined the Army in 1974, and I was an enlisted soldier, so this really dates me. Now you've embarrassed me, Tim. Thank you.
No, 74.
But, 1974, and the Vol Army was just being stood up at that time. It was the end of the winding down of the Vietnam era. So I came in on the delayed entry program. So when I was in between my junior and senior year in high school, I had to get parental permission. I took my oath that summer. That's where my military service started, and it's really continued through to today. I was either on active duty or in the reserves while I was in transition.
I don't know if you know, but you've got to be one of the longer serving officers in the Army currently serving.
I'd rather not go there.
Okay, but I'm assuming that you're one of the more senior by
Yes.
time. Anyway, so you took a long, circuitous route to get here.
So I grew up in I grew up on a ranch in North Dakota, and everything was pretty homogeneous. And then my family moved into town, into Fargo, when I was about 11 years old. And then my parents divorced, which pretty traumatic. And then coming out of that a culture and an environment where that just didn't occur. That was not routine. And then as a young person, and looking back on it, I mean, I accept responsibility for the decisions and choices that I made as a young person. So I'm not deferring to my parents at this point. Right. So then I really, became kind of a rebellious young person, angry, and made a lot of poor choices in relationships and just life decisions. So I didn't fare well in the public school system. They invited me not to come back.
Wow. So you find yourself in Germany.
Yes.
When you had all the freedom.
Yeah, and so, you grow up and I go back to the bad choices. So a lot of the things that were going on in the late 60s, early 70s, you can just let your imagination roll. But the drugs and the alcohol of that era, and when you put on the uniform and it's a different army, that was a different army. And so the Army, we were coming out of a Vietnam conflict, a protracted conflict. The Army was, as General Abrams at the time stated, the Army had lost its soul, and the Army needed to be reinvigorated. Hence, things like the Abrams Charter, standing up the Rangers, a model of what a soldier should look like and act like and the conduct. But that's the Army I came into, so it was a very troubled Army. We still had people who had been drafted who were in at that time, and I brought the baggage of my youth with me. I had significant drug addiction issues. I had significant alcohol issues. That was my way of coping. And then an NCO, a non-commissioned officer, who was a medic, Doc McElroy. So you got to also understand who's an African American. You got to understand the times. This is a racially divided Army.
Right.
There's a lot of racial tension. There were riots, for example, on military installations. There were things going on back in the continental United States. So this was a very difficult season, and for an African American to take an interest in a white guy from North Dakota was not common. And he just was a human connection for me. He actually took time to get to know me. He actually do what I think a leader should do, and that is know their people. And so he was a person of deep faith. He wasn't preachy.
Right.
Yeah, he just lived it. And he had a very winsome personality, and he always was very kind to me. And so through the course of that relationship, I started to really look in and see where I was headed, and began to ask hard questions. Is this really where I want to be? Is this the kind of person I want to be? And how can I get out of this? What's the exit strategy from what I've created? And then faith became a very, very important vehicle for that to occur. And my life immediately began to transform and change. I was awakened to, wow, there's a world out there, and I've been letting it pass me by, and I'm not taking my role and responsibility as a meaningful member of society and filling it. And it was like a light bulb went off.
Yeah, a cloud lifted.
Yeah, absolutely, a cloud lifted. And so faith is a very, very important part of my formation, and anything positive, I would say, for the remainder of my years to this date that has occurred as a direct result of that place of beginning, and attributing those things to God's hand and the Lord's hand in my life. And then what he did is just because you have a spiritual awakening or a conversion experience doesn't mean that everything is cleaned up. So he realized, you need somebody to help mentor you and work with you. So he introduced me to the chaplain, McElroy.
McElroy clearly saw the potential in you, right? There, that
Absolutely.
phrase about some people see an acorn and only see the acorn, and some people see the tree, right? That it's going to become. So I think he was a guy who was looking at the tree when he was looking at you, because even with all that, even with that transformation and you kind of rededicating your life and seeing things, you're a long way from a general.
Yes.
Shoot ahead. So now you find yourself, you're back in the Army, you're commissioned, you're an officer, and you're a chaplain. How do you end up in a Ranger regiment? How do you become the Rangers chaplain or Special Operations chaplain?
Along the way, I picked up a wife.
Okay.
And 4 kids. You bring a family with you, and I think that's very important, because a lot of things I want to talk about, you got to have the backdrop of the family. My first assignment was in the 82nd Airborne Division, and retired Lieutenant General Vines was my battalion commander. And that's where I got the opportunity to, go to airborne school.
Jump out of planes. Test your faith.
The opportunity, you got that right. And then he made it possible for me to go to Ranger School. He said, would you like to go? I said, yeah. So I hadn't been a chaplain barely a year and a half. So that just began for me a series of deployments. My wife and I jokingly say that we shared a parallel path, but we didn't share memories. So I have experiences, the family has experiences, but they're not shared experiences. And so we have to balance those things. So coming back, the Rangers was the window back into the Special Operations community, and from there I went to JSOC and Special Forces Command and SOCOM and other assignments. But the Rangers was really a foundational, I think, assignment for me that really kind of tested me, pushed my limits as a chaplain, and I think it was just an invaluable time in my life.
How? You mean physically, or dealing with having to take on the issues of the Rangers? I mean, what they're seeing and doing and becoming the emotional sponge for them almost.
Yeah, this is, just the very nature of, the mission requires, the taking of life. and the residual collateral that is associated with that. So not only are you a sounding board for those experiences for your Rangers, but you're sharing those experiences with them.
Right.
So the residual of those activities affect you as well. So that's what I mean. I think it was a combination of being assigned in the Rangers initially was really, I think it stretched me as a chaplain. It pushed me physically, mentally, emotionally, my first assignment. And then coming back at the regiment, and then, 9/11 and all the deployments and associated things like that, the loss of Rangers, those that were wounded. I mean, to this day, I still remember dates. I still remember names. I still remember.
Well, and I don't want to go down this road, but I want people to understand how many services you've been to. More than anybody should have to.
Tim, I couldn't even begin to. Hundreds of them.
Right. Yeah, and that I know. That takes a toll on any human. So again, and for you, you've got your spiritual background. We haven't even talked about your physical fitness. Again, I know that you used to run ultra marathons and just go out on a Saturday and run one and be back at work on Monday after running 100 miles like nothing. So I know you keep yourself in shape, but how do you kind of steel yourself from that kind of what you see and what you hear and the pain of all of that?
Yeah, we use a term all the time, balance. I don't like that term.
Okay.
Life isn't about achieving balance. It's about integration. So we love to use the term resilience. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, resilience is really the integration of elements into your life that enable you to be flex with adversity when it comes your way. So I look at it, I think from my vantage point, I look at it, physical is one element. So I must physically maintain sustain myself physically. I need to ensure that I do all the right things in terms of, what I eat, physical regimen, exercise, all those things. Those are very important. Mental exercise, being a person who's well-read, emotional, being able to, know where I'm at and keep those things in check. And then spiritually to keep, for me, that is where I draw a lot of my strength from. That enables me to digest or take in those things, and then process them and put them back out in a meaningful perspective in life. And I think I had a sergeant major that, we used to do these briefings, we do these briefings, post-deployment reintegration briefings.
Right.
We talk about things like, you need to make sure you identify things like post-traumatic stress. And so one day he just came up to me and said, Chaplain, I love chaplains, right? And I said, yes, Sergeant Major, I know you do. And he said, Chaplain, you know what? When are you going to talk about post-traumatic order? And I said, Sergeant Major, that is an awesome insight, because you've just touched on a truth that is absolutely paramount to what, in fact, the narrative that really needs to be told. We hear so much about the post-traumatic stress, the negative side.
Right.
What we don't talk about is the positive side. So if I was to put my wife right there and she would talk to you about these years of separation, she'd say, I'm better for it. I'm stronger. Our marriage is deeper. I'm a better person as a result of it. So I guess what I would communicate for myself, and I think a lot of other soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, we don't want to be pitied.
Right.
We don't want that.
Right.
I always
dislike when people say, did you have to go? When I'd say I'm in the Army, did you have to go to Afghanistan?
Yeah. I think the story that needs to be told is we're better.
Yes.
We're better as a result of enduring hardship, as going through those things, so the bonds of relationship with people are deeper as a result of what you shared.
Well, you are a 100% on message if you work for Spartan as well. I'll let you know that. Our boss, founder Joe DeSena, his phrase is obstacle immunity, right? And so basically, the more obstacles and challenges you face, the easier they are for the very next one, right?
Yep.
What can you maybe share for just the broader audience, or how they can kind of overcome whatever challenge that faces their life?
Yeah, sure, I'd be happy to. I think, first of all, It's what's foundational in your life. So, it's like running a race. You don't just decide to get up one morning and, I'm going to go run this race and yippee.
Well, I have.
I have, yeah. No, I got a story about that, but we'll spare but for the sake of time. But yeah, so but if you're conditioned to that point, if you're already conditioned and getting up one day and running that race, you can maybe do it.
Right.
Whereas if somebody's never done it before, that's a process. So I think when life throws things at us, what is foundational to us, where our moorings, where we're grounded, is really going to help us to overcome adversity. That's the starting point. So you can't just take an empty tank or an unconditioned person and then expect them to perform at an optimal level. There's a process, and life brings those things our way to strengthen us. It goes back to that post-traumatic order issue. And now the invaluable aspects of what will help you in those times is, let's start with a negative. Isolation is never a good thing. So if you're in training or if you're doing something, it's never in isolation. You might be performing on your own, but it's never in isolation of others. You're being observed. You're touching others in the process. So isolation is never a good thing, healthy thing in anything. And what is a natural tendency sometimes in adversity is to turn in.
Turn in, right.
Yeah, you isolate yourself. That's the most damaging thing that you can do. Strength, a strong person recognizes, like a cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. A strong person recognizes immediately the importance of others. So connection, relationships are really important when you're going through adversity. The ability to have the strength to be transparent about what you're going through and being able to open up and share that with other people is really a strength. That's not a sign of weakness. That's a strength.
Right.
Really, I would say, conversely, a sign of weakness is a person who lacks the ability to do that very thing.
To either ask or to recognize that they need the help.
Absolutely.
In the first place.
And then I think, on a professional level, it's then where do I go to get that help?
Yeah.
So you may be a person who's in a faith community, and there may be answers there.
Right.
It may require some other kind of expertise, whether it's, a professional counselor, if it's some kind of issue that you're going through in a relationship.
Or whatever.
Yeah. Or whatever it is in life that you have these touchstones, you have these connections, and you know where to go in time of difficulty to get, recharged. It's kind of like, mile 26 in the marathon. I mean, you can see it, it's coming. Your body's telling you to quit.
Right.
Just quit now, stop, And you can see it, and where you draw encouragement from is a lot of times it's a person who's running next to you,
right.
And you see them and you realize they're going through the same agony you are, but we can do this together, and we can finish strong. And so I think a person who's going to overcome adversity is a person who has oriented their life and recognizes that there's strength that they can draw from outside of themselves, whether it's their faith, whether it's their family, whether it's their friends, whether it's a professional. In time of difficulty, a strong person doesn't turn in.
It reaches out.
They reach out and they excel in the process, and they find that they can be pressed beyond what they thought were the limits of their capacity to endure and move past that, and what that does for a person. So I would say in my own life, I'm sitting here today and we were joking off camera, so how's this like being a general? I got to pinch myself, and when I consider, when you look back to where this all began,
right? Yeah.
I mean,
pretty humble beginnings.
It is. And how do you get here? Not alone.
Yeah, great answer.
Yeah, you don't get here alone. You get here because a lot of other people along the way invested in you, believed in you, supported you, and you embraced it. And then in turn, you don't want to disappoint them. So in your adversity and your struggle, you say, I can't let them down, so I can't let myself down. So I've got to press, and I've got to find the answers, the solutions. And I think that when people are going through struggle and adversity, strive to make that connection. That's where strength comes from. And so, that may not be the most sexy strategy or set of tools, but I think it's worked. It's served me well my entire life.
Well, it's definitely something that can translate for everybody.
All of these things that integrate into your identity and who you are. So for me, faith is just such an important part, because it's really where I derive meaning and purpose for life, is transcendence to existence, there's something other.
Yeah.
Serving your nation is a part of that, a wonderful part of that. Serving with soldiers is a part of that. Your family's all a part of that. But at the end of the day, you're serving something larger than what's in front of you. And so I think that having that transcendent worldview, in my estimation, faith gives you that. And I believe it gives you a leg up on the adversity obstacle.
Yeah.
It really does.
I'm sure it does.
It does.
Yeah, without question.
And I think people find it in expression or practice in different ways. But I can't envision having gone through the things I've gone through without my faith.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Classics on Spartan Up. Let us know in the comments if you learned something from either McChrystal, Solhjem, Joe, Colonel Nye, Sephra, or Johnny in this episode. And by the way, Joe DeSena's new parenting book is out. It's called 10 Rules for Mental Toughness for Families. And you can find out more at spartan.com/10rules. Or check out the best of many of the past Spartan Up episodes at the Tough Bible at spartan.com/toughbible. See you next time. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Endurance Series on Spartan Up Podcast. Spartan Up is your partner in resilience for mind, body, and spirit. We're here 3 days every week. Tuesdays, you can find Joe DeSena, founder and CEO of Spartan, interviewing biohackers, business leaders, authors, and athletes. Thursdays and Saturdays, catch episodes from our DECA, Endurance, Trail, Combat, and La Ruta series. Do you know someone who needs a little nudge? Maybe they could use some motivation, tactics to be stronger, healthier, happier, more successful. Tell them about our show. And if you're watching on YouTube, leave us a comment. We want to know who's watching and who's listening. Thanks. See you next time. This episode of Spartan Up is brought to you by Durolane, a single injection that may provide up to 6 months relief from osteoarthritis knee pain. Risks can include general knee pain and pain at the injection site. You can see full prescribing information at durolane.com.